The dining room gleamed with cold perfection. Polished marble floors, an impossibly long glass table, and silver flatware that still bore the department store tags. I'd flown in that morning after Mallory's last-minute reminder text. "You're still coming. Right, Dorian will expect you there." The implication, as always, was that my presence was optional, but absence would be noted. Still I came. I brought a bottle of Bram's 1978 Burgundy something he'd once said we'd save for Dorian's milestone moment. I'd wrapped it in linen and tucked a handwritten note inside the label. I wasn't expecting a grand gesture, just acknowledgement. Mallory wore crimson and diamonds. She gave her toast with the confidence of someone certain every camera in the room was pointed her way. She praised Dorian's new business acquisition, his leadership, his discipline. Then with a flick of her manicured wrist, she gestured for him to speak. Dorian stood, holding a glass of champagne, not the Burgundy I brought, and smiled as his gaze swept the table. "Well," he said, chuckling, "I'm grateful for all of you being here. And honestly, the best gift this year would be if Mom stopped hovering." His eyes met mine for just a second. Or better, left my life altogether. Laughter. A few gasps masked as chuckles. Even Mallory raised her flute in mock applause. I didn't blink. I placed my fork gently beside the untouched filet mignon, folded my napkin, stood up. No dramatic exits, no tearful gasps. Just me sliding the chair back, smoothing my skirt, and saying with quiet grace, "Thank you for dinner." Then I turned and walked toward the door. No one followed. No one called my name. Back at the guest room, I zipped my suitcase without folding anything. The Burgundy sat unopened on the counter. The only sound was the wheeled suitcase bumping down each wooden stair as I carried it outside. The sound of the sea greeted me before I even stepped inside. Not the romantic kind, the kind that seeps into your bones low and cold, and always just on the edge of rising. My house had always felt warm despite its age, but that evening the walls seemed to retreat from me. Maybe they were waiting to see if I'd brought grief home again. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I hung my coat, turned the heat up a notch, and poured a cup of lukewarm tea I'd left in the pot 2 days before. Then I went into the bedroom, sat at the edge of the bed Bram and I once shared, and slipped off my shoes with a quiet sigh. I reached beneath the bed and pressed my palm flat against the teak floorboard near the center. A soft shift. The wood lifted just enough for my fingers to slip under. Beneath it, nestled in the same space that once hid anniversary gifts and emergency cash, was the tan folder. I hadn't touched it in years, not since Bram and I first drafted the plans when Dorian got engaged. The label still read, "Contingency. Personal." I placed it on the bed and opened it slowly, each page as familiar to me as my own handwriting. The first sheet deed to my house in my name alone. The next, the living trust for Dorian's home funds, transferred through my firm years ago, but the controlling interest had never been released to him. I'd always meant to hand it over when I turned 75, but 71 is old enough. I reread the clause about revocation rights, my initials beside Bram's signature, the lawyer's stamp. Everything Dorian thought was his wasn't. I closed the folder and ran my hand over the worn manila cover, not with vengeance, but with a quiet steadiness. I didn't need to rage. I didn't need to explain. I just needed to act. I slid the folder into my bag along with my checkbook and the old maroon ledger Bram had always kept tucked in his desk drawer. It began with a call after Bram died. Dorian had an idea, a promising app, something to do with scheduling logistics for restaurants. I didn't understand the tech, but I understood the passion in his voice. He needed help with development costs, and of course, I said yes. The second startup came 2 years later. That one didn't even make it to launch. I covered the office lease, bought the website domain, and paid off a silent partner who threatened legal action when things unraveled. When he got engaged, I offered to help with the down payment on the condo. A head start, I called it, though I quietly paid in full and let him think it was partial. He was proud. I didn't want to take that from him. I just wanted him to feel safe. Mallory was always polite, never warm. After the wedding, she sent a typed thank you card, unsigned. When she opened her boutique, she called it Mallory James Atelier and came to me 2 weeks in panicked about unexpected expenses. I wrote a check without asking for details. They never said we need you. They said things like it'd just be easier, or we'll make it up to you, or we were hoping you might step in just this once. But it was never just once. The calls grew shorter, edged in impatience. Dorian no longer asked about my garden or sent photos of their vacations unless there was a receipt attached. Mallory's voice was always cool-clipped, like my presence in their life was a formality they tolerated. It wasn't the money I whispered aloud, now fingers tracing the edge of the ledger. It was the expectation I'd always say yes. And I had, for too long. I flipped open the maroon book and turned to the most recent page, a list of transactions each marked personal transfer. 27 of them spanning 8 years. Not one had been repaid. I picked up my pen and drew a single line under the last entry. The first act of saying no didn't need to be loud, just final. The office smelled like eucalyptus and laminate. My attorney Peter was younger than my coffee maker, but he was sharp and discreet. I handed him the folder without preamble. I'd like to finalize the trust amendments, effective immediately. And I want to transfer ownership of my primary residence to the holding company, Lochwin Property Management. He blinked once, but said nothing. Just nodded and began scanning the documents. I'd pre-filled most of the forms. Old habits. Peter paused over one page. You're removing Dorian as contingent beneficiary, yes. To no one. For now. It took under an hour. He didn't ask questions after that. I appreciated that. Before leaving, I handed him a sealed envelope labeled, to be opened only upon my death. From there, it was just mechanics. I called the realtor I used to play bridge with, told her to quietly list the house, but only sell to Lochwin. The sale would loop back to a trust under my name. It was a transaction that looked like surrender on paper. It wasn't. Next, I visited the credit union. I froze 2 accounts and redirected others to new holdings. The card Mallory used for her boutique expenses would stop working by morning. The final step, a text to Dorian. Short. No blame. You said I should leave. I'm honoring your birthday wish. No forwarding address, no emotion. I packed what I needed, a few clothes, Bram's watch, the ledger, the tan folder, and one photo of him and me on Cannon Beach, back before Dorian was born. I left behind the oak dining table where we used to play cards. I left the wedding photo on the mantel. I left my good dishes, my tea tins, and the quilt Bram's mother sewed when we were newlyweds. And I left one envelope taped to the back of the pantry door. It wasn't labeled. The next morning, I signed a year-long lease on a furnished condo in Lincoln City under the name Cora Wynn. The keys felt cool in my palm. Mallory was standing at the register of a high-end boutique when her business card was declined. Twice. She laughed politely, blamed the machine and tapped it again. Declined. She tried her phone app. Access denied. By the time she got home, she was flushed and fuming. You need to call the bank, she snapped at Dorian, tossing the card on the marble counter like it had betrayed her. He shrugged, half listening. But when he opened the mortgage portal and saw the payment had bounced and then found himself locked out of their joint account, his face drained of color. He tried calling the credit union. Wait times. Then more questions than answers. That evening, Mallory found the envelope. It was in the mailbox wedged between a real estate flyer and an overdue HOA notice. No return address. Just Dorian's name handwritten in looping cursive that had once signed his field trip forms. He opened it at the dining table, lips pressed tight. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. No greeting, no sign-off, just one sentence. "You asked me to disappear." I simply obeyed. Mallory scoffed. "She's being dramatic." Dorian didn't answer. He read the line again, and again. He held the paper like it might change under his fingers. "She's bluffing," Mallory said, standing. "She'll be back." Or begging for forgiveness. "You'll see." But Dorian didn't believe that. Because he knew the house, the accounts, the foundation of his company. All of it was held together by silent threads Corvina had woven through the years, gently, invisibly, without ever asking for control. And now, those threads had been cut. He opened his laptop, clicked into his business dashboard. Red warnings blinked where green numbers used to be. The expansion loan he'd signed last month, secured against family assets, was now a loose promise. He reached for his phone, thought about calling her, thought about apologizing. But he didn't even have her number anymore. Up the coast, I sipped tea as waves rolled against the shore and opened the ledger to a fresh page. The rain had come in waves that morning, soft and rhythmic, against the window panes. I sat at the small table near the glass ledger open, reading by natural light. The maroon cover had faded along the spine, but inside, every page was intact, neat, dated, precise. I turned to the last section Bram had ever written in. It was from the final month of his life, when he could barely hold a pen, but still insisted on tracking every detail. His handwriting trembled, yet the words were steady. "If our son ever forgets kindness, Corvina will remember law." He had written it just after Dorian had canceled a visit. Said he was too busy to fly up for his father's birthday. Bram didn't say a word aloud, but he wrote that sentence and underlined it twice. I ran my fingers over the ink, feeling the quiet weight of it settle in my chest. For years, I believed kindness would be enough. That love, even when stretched thin, could still hold its shape. But kindness without boundaries becomes currency, and eventually, people forget it ever had value. I placed a fresh sheet in the printer tray. Began making copies of every financial transfer, every loan I forgave, every promise Dorian made in writing and never kept. His signature showed up far more than mine. Once the packet was assembled, I sealed the first copy in a thick envelope marked Trelwyn, private. That one would go into my safety deposit box. The second stack I fed into the scanner, one page at a time. There was a journalist I remembered from years ago. I'd helped her fight a legal loophole that was cheating single mothers out of subsidized housing. She'd sent a thank you note that read, "If you ever need a story told, I'll be listening." I found her email. She still wrote under the same byline. I drafted a message brief and measured. "I think I have a story for you. One about trust silence and where the money really came from." I attached the files, clicked send, and turned back to Bram's handwriting. The headline dropped on a Tuesday. "Fintech stars' hidden ties to untraceable family funds." It wasn't a smear job, it was precision work. The journalist had done her homework. Pulled dates, cross-referenced financial transfers, even quoted one of Dorian's early investors who'd assumed the funds came from venture capital, not a parent's retirement. There were no direct accusations of fraud, just the kind of sharp, clean exposure that raised every eyebrow in a boardroom and shook every hand that once signed a check in his favor. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I simply closed the article, folded my hands, and sat in stillness. By Wednesday, his company's website went offline for maintenance. By Thursday, 3 investors had issued public statements distancing themselves from the brand. By Friday, Mallory packed a single suitcase and left a single note. "I married a man who needed a mother, not a wife." The irony wasn't lost on me. That weekend, Dorian drove to my old house. I know this because the neighbor I once lent sugar to emailed me confused. Said a man in a navy blazer had knocked twice, looked through the windows, and sat on the porch steps for nearly an hour. He'd aged in the photo she sent. Less polish, more panic. The house, of course, was empty. The deed no longer read Corvina Trelwyn. It now belonged to Lochwin Enterprises. The lights were off. The garden was overgrown. He tried the mailbox, but there was nothing there. The neighbor said he didn't say a word when he left. Just drove off slowly, one hand at his mouth, the other tight on the wheel. I stood by my window that evening watching the tide roll in. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed. Closure wasn't something he could demand. Some things, once untethered, drift far beyond reach. I brewed a fresh pot of tea and sat with the quiet. The wind rattled the windows, but inside, everything held. The knock came to his office door early in the morning. Two men in plain suits, soft-spoken, but firm. They handed Dorian a sealed notice and requested access to his financials. The IRS doesn't arrive with sirens. They arrive with files. At first, he played it off. Delays, miscommunications, maybe an outdated EIN. But when they mentioned multiple flagged accounts tied to a non-disclosed family trust, I imagine his mouth went dry. The trust was never in his name. He'd signed documents over the years, of course, but never read them fully. I always left him the illusion of control. And he never questioned what didn't resist. That illusion had expired. I received the update indirectly from my attorney. The firm had been contacted for clarification, which we had already anticipated. Everything was in order, legal binding airtight, and quiet. That afternoon, my attorney mailed Dorian a letter. Certified. Signed. It read, "Dear Mr. Trelwyn, per the original trust agreement executed under Lochwin Holding, please refer to Clause 18B. In the event of emotional misconduct or breach of dignity toward the trustee, assets may be reallocated at the sole discretion of said trustee. The reallocation has been completed. No appeal will be granted." He read it 3 times, then called. Straight to voicemail. He tried again, then opened his laptop, typing out an email. Something between apology and plea. I never saw it. All he received was a short reply from the server. "This inbox is no longer active." That night, I opened my own inbox to a confirmation the remaining assets had successfully been redirected. My name removed from Dorian's holdings, the final accounts rolled into a charitable trust under Bram's name. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like sealing a door. Outside, the tide had risen again, foam licking at the stones. I sat in the quiet, lit a single candle, and pulled the donation ledger close. The scholarship details were almost ready. The papers arrived in a thin manila envelope, neatly tabbed and ready for signature. The fund would bear Bram's full name, Bramwell Elias Trelwyn Memorial Scholarship. It would support students studying financial stewardship with a clause requiring a focus on elder guardianship and ethical estate planning. A small amount at first, enough for 1 student a year, but permanent, protected. My name wouldn't be listed as founder, just an anonymous donor. It was better that way. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted a shift in the current subtle but certain toward care, not convenience. I signed the last page, sealed the envelope, and walked it to the corner postbox myself. No courier, no announcement. On the way back, I passed the little gallery near the wharf. A new piece hung in the window, a soft charcoal etching of a woman standing alone on a cliffside, the wind tugging her coat toward the sea. Her face was turned away, but her posture was familiar. Steady. Not bowed, not broken. Just still. I stopped in front of it and stood there for a long while. Tourists passed behind me, their chatter muffled by glass and distance. I didn't move. Bram would have liked the piece. He always said good art tells the truth without trying to be loud. Some stories end in silence, I murmured, not forgiveness. I didn't need a portrait on anyone's mantle. I didn't need my name carved into plaques or mentioned in speeches. I had something else now. Peace. I turned from the gallery window, pulled my scarf tighter, and continued home along the path that edged the dunes. The wind had picked up salt hanging in the air, the kind that reminded you everything eventually returns to the sea. Back at the condo, the candle had burned low, a halo of wax puddled around the base. I blew it out, gently tucked the leftover documents into a drawer, and opened the envelope that had arrived earlier. White no return address. The handwriting inside was shaky, but I recognized it immediately. A year to the day. Dorian stood before a weathered headstone nestled in a small private cemetery outside Portland. The engraving was simple. Lockwyn beloved, by none known by few. She lived 72 years and left it all to education. He read it twice. He hadn't known what to expect. But something inside him, some childish thread of hope, had convinced him he'd find her name etched in stone, maybe even a quote, a date, a chance at closure. Instead, just a name she once used in filings, a shell company, an alias, not a mother, no flowers, no photo, no sign that anyone ever came here but him. Later that afternoon, he sat in a corner booth of a small cafe in downtown Ashland, far from cameras, far from headlines. A single almond tart rested on the porcelain plate in front of him. He didn't touch it. The pastry was her favorite to bake. Light, not too sweet, with just the right density in the crust. He hadn't eaten one in years. It used to annoy him the way she insisted on baking from scratch when store-bought was quicker. Now, the smell alone made his chest ache. His phone buzzed. A missed call from the bank. A message from Mallory, just a question mark. He turned the screen face down. The coffee beside him had gone cold. He was alone now. Not publicly, there were still people around him, but truly, quietly, irrevocably. And somewhere far from him, I walked the coastal trail that curved along the dunes of Lincoln City. The wind was brisk, but the sun warm on my cheek. I bent down and picked up a small pink shell, perfect and whole. I held it to my ear, not to hear the ocean, but to remember how silence can be both echo and answer. I didn't need to visit any graves. I was still very much alive. He wanted me gone, so I gave him exactly that and everything that came with it.